All right, so we're not going to sketch anything by hand necessarily, but I want you to be able to translate a graph from a computer to your own paper, okay? Because there are some important skills here, and it shows that you really kind of understand exactly what's going on if you can sketch it from a computer onto your paper and include all the relevant information. So we are going to be using Desmos to graph things. But then I want you to sketch it on your own. So for the homework, for the quiz, this is what you're going to be doing here. Okay. So the important things to show are the period, the midline, maxes and min, how high does it go, how low does it go, and those are the main things, I think. Maybe a number 4. Let's do an example and then we'll see. All right. Let's do example number 8. Sketch a graph of y equals -2 sine of pi over 2 x plus pi plus 1. We'll sketch it over here. Oh, yeah, the scale. So like, is this 1, 2, 3, etc. Let's start by graphing this on Desmos. All right. If we go over to Desmos and say, all right, let's graph this. We have y equals -2 sine of pi x. Whoa, maybe not capital letters. Sine of pi over 2 times x plus 1. So we want to show all the relevant information. So we need to know the period. We're going to notice here that the period's nice. The period's 4. The period doesn't have to do with pi. If the period has to do with pi, then it gets a little trickier, but it's still very doable. So in this case, it's much simpler. It's a sine graph, so it starts at 0, but there's a negative, so instead of going up first, it's going to go down first. So let's include all this relevant information. We're counting by ones, so let's include that. Like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, etc. If we were using pi's, we'd have to count by something that has to do with pi. All right, and we're starting at 0, 1. What's the midline here? The midline is this thing right here, right? It's going to be y equals +1. Let's graph that on our notes with a dotted line. Graph the midline right here. It's this horizontal line. Half of our graph should be above this, and half of our graph should be below this. And actually, let's do our graph in blue. Starting at 0, 1, we get to our minimum at 1, -1. And then we go back to the midline at 2, 1. And then to our maximum at 3, 3. And then back to our midline, and then back to our minimum, back to our midline. And once you get a couple points, you should be able to just copy the pattern and get a good looking graph. Now let's connect this. Something looks like so. And that's our sine graph. So the period is clearly shown, right? We know that we're at -1 here. We know we're at +3 here. That's a period of 4. The midline is graphed. The maximums and minimums are very clear as well, right? We go up to +3. We go down to -1. You could write this as -1, -2 if you really want to be even more precise. The maximum, minimum, the scale, that's what these are. These are the scale. Those are maybe the most important part. All right, and that's what I want from your graphs. Let's do one that's more complicated though. Example 9. For y equals -2 cosine of 2x plus, oh, I'm gonna change my mind, and I know I'm gonna pay for it. 2x plus pi plus 1. For this graph, find its amplitude, its period, its phase shift, vertical shift, and sketch. I'm going off script. Let's see how it works. All right. So let's just go one by one. Amplitude. Amplitude is the absolute value of A. So here, the amplitude, the absolute value of A is +2. The period is 2 pi divided by the absolute value of B. Our B value is 2. So 2 pi divided by 2, our period is pi. Phase shift is C divided by B. But notice C here, right? C is -pi. We're adding pi. So C is -pi over B, which is 2. So our phase shift is -pi over 2. Or we can say it's pi over 2 to the left because it's negative. And last, vertical shift is this +1. We're going to say it's up 1 unit. So let's use all this information to graph. All right, its vertical shift is up 1. We're going to be fine to do it like this. To use all this information to graph. Let's type the function into Desmos. And say, okay, this is -2 cosine of 2x plus pi plus 3. Is this what I said? No. 2x plus pi plus 1 is what I said. Make sure I'm writing it down right. All right, so this is what we have. So because our period has to do with pi, on Desmos, you should really go into, and you can't even see what I'm clicking on. Let me zoom out. You should go into the settings button and say, okay, our period has to do with pi. So let's divide this into 4 pieces. Period is pi. Let's put a step of pi over 4. And just like before, the step of pi over 4 is making it a little unhappy, but it should be okay. The period is pi, so let's look at a couple periods in each direction. Let's go from -2 pi to +2 pi. And then the y-axis is fine. We could change the y-axis if we wanted. So notice our graph is starting at the top. You say, why is it starting at the top, Jason? Right? We have a negative. Well, the negative means that normally we'd start here at negative, but we're getting shifted pi to the left. Oh, we're not getting shifted pi to the left. Our phase shift is pi over 2 to the left. Notice if, yeah. Oh, I have it written down, right? Okay, great. I was worried there for a second. The phase shift is pi over 2 to the left because negative means we'd be negative cosine down here, pi over 2 to the left. This is where that phase shift can be seen. But again, all you really need to be able to do is to graph this very clearly. So our scale, the most important thing in our scale is that it has to do with pi, right? We need to clearly show this information. So in writing our scale here, usually if we think of a sine graph, we can think about a sine graph or a cosine graph in 4 parts, right? Top, middle, bottom, middle. So let's divide this period into 4 parts. Let's say this is pi, and this is negative pi. Let's say this is pi, and this is negative pi, right? So there's 4 parts between it. That's really useful for when we graph things. Because again, top, middle, bottom, middle is how these sine graphs work, or cosine graphs in this case. All right, so we're starting at 0, 3. And then we're going to the midline. Oh, let's graph that midline. The midline is at y equals 1. Again, this is 1, 2, 3, -1, -2, -3. The midline is at y equals 1 again. Let's again graph it in blue. We're starting at 0, 3. And then we go through the point pi over 4, 1. This is pi over 4 right there. It's a quarter of the way to pi. And then we get to the bottom, the minimum, at pi over 2, -1. This is right here is the next value of pi over 2. And then we just keep on going, like so. Every pi over 4, we oscillate between the minimum, the midline, the maximum, the midline, the minimum, the midline, and so on. Now we connect these dots in a sinusoidal fashion. All right. And that is the graph of this function. It shows all the important things that we need to include. We answered the other questions as well, and we're good to go. Good luck. Let me know if you have questions.